Sunday morning. It is the second Sunday of the month, and so therefore we have Tom Whitmore. Am I hearing some feedback?
We always give you feedback, Bob, but not hearing any now.
Okay. Sometimes if you have a phone on. But anyway, Tom Whitmore, the master of all that I know, has lined us up a great show. So you want to tell us about it, Tom?
So Ron Drummond and John D. Berry have put together the 40th anniversary edition of Little Big by John Crowley, a huge job of bookmaking. You will see this thing weighs 6.5 pounds. It's illustrated by Peter Milton, who is one of the really great engravers of the early 21st century. And it has been a major piece of work to get this book to exist. And therefore, I want them to talk a little bit about what goes into producing such a fine book, the trials and tribulations that led to it happening, and what they're hoping is going to happen with it as it goes along. And along the way, we'll talk about things like Chip Delaney. We'll talk about other writers, but mostly we'll be talking about this really wonderful volume and why one would bother to make a book like this in this age of computer printing and read it online. So, and I'll let each of them do a short introduction of themselves because they can say more about themselves than I can. So, Ron, would you like to go first?
Yes. Hello. I'm a writer, editor, small press publisher, independent scholar, futurist with a lowercase f.
Okay. And John?
That was succinct. I am an editor and typographer, book designer, obviously, writer about design and type, and general person who deals with words, both as words and as images.
Okay. Now, I know this wasn't the first book the two of you did together,
Nope.
but every indication in the, there's Antiquities, the first book with a lot of glare.
Yes.
7 Stories by John Crowley.
Yes.
Well, it's even right around.
I sort of, I might begin by giving the deep background, as it were.
Yeah.
In a sense, this project, you can start anywhere, any story, but really the start, the cold call that I made to John Crowley in March 1980 in Long Beach, California, to John in the Bergen, Massachusetts. And this is back in the day when there were telephone directories and operator assisted phone calls and stuff. And so I just called up information in that part of the world, and they gave me his phone number, and I called him up. And he was wonderful. He was delightful. He welcomed. He was in fine fettle because he had literally just walked in the door with his wife Lori Block, and their twin daughter. Yes. Oh, okay. Their twin daughters coming home from the hospital. They had been born at 4, but there was trouble with one of them, and they were in the hospital the whole time. But Lori was busy taking care of them, and he said, "No, I can talk." So we talked for about a half hour, and I said I wanted to publish a collection of his stories at some point, and he was amenable to the idea. And that was an old seed point. That was March 1987. And he was a local Seattle fan, was one of the people who suggested, actually was the person who suggested Nebula, the one word, as the name for a small press, kind of a highfalutin name for a small press, but with. And In 1990, Crowley came to Seattle and taught at Clarion West, and we launched an expedition with a number of the students and a number of local Seattle fans to a ghost about 60 miles outside of Seattle, an old mining ghost, and went for a long walk through a forest, and there was a graveyard in the middle of the forest and a few foundations and a magical adventure, and that's where we antiquities and 7 Stories, the book we published of John's, came out in late '93. John D. Barry designed it magnificently and taught me most of what I at that point knew about book design. Actually taught me almost everything I know about book design. And he's helpfully holding it up now. And because the Little Big Project is famous at this point for being like 15, but it's finally a real object in the real world, thank goodness. Antiquities came out 3 months early and in fairly short order in the fall of 1993. And at that point, on that night 2 walk with John Crowley to the ghost town, that's where he and I first discussed the possibility of doing. It was just a phantasm at that point. But after John saw what we did with Antiquities, which I published and edited, and John did magnificently, he said that we were a team that could probably do justice to a deluxe edition of Little Big. So fast forward 85, another Clarion teaching visit of John Crowley to Seattle. And John and I managed to escape to the Seattle Art Museum, to the 20th century floor. And we talk about what living possibly do justice to Little Big. And he had various ideas, I had various ideas, and we were sort of looking at this, but we couldn't figure anything out. We couldn't do anything. And at one point we turned a corner and here was a frame print by Peter Milton. Neither of us had ever seen Milton's art to our knowledge. And it was, we encountered it like with the force of revelation, if you will. And we both pretty much declared like that's the ideal. And anyway, and finally in the summer of 2000, Peter Milton. Yes, there's his artwork, the beautiful jacket that John is holding up, and
for those who aren't at all familiar, with Milton, I should say that he works in monumental-sized engravings. His steel, his plates are the largest engraving plates I've ever seen.
Right.
And my grandmother was a print dealer, so I've seen a lot of prints.
Yeah, most of these prints took him 6 months to a year to and that was, like 6 days a week, 12 hours a day of work. The man was completely obsessive about it in a good way, and they're photorealistic and highly detailed. So it presented a number of problems reproductively for printing, because our sources were scattered on together from multiple different locations. So we had analog photographs digitized. We hired a digital photographer to take several hundred photographs. There were sources. Sometimes we got single art dealers and so on. And Milton was ecstatic about the whole thing. He loved fine typography, immediately fell for John's work. And he reacted really to antiquities at that point, and he loved the details from his work being reproduced in conjunction with fine typography. And so the interesting thing is that the feeling tone of Peter's work is astonishingly violent tone of Little Big as a story. And so what it was producing an edition that utilized pre-existing art and linked it intricately with a pre-existing story. Neither was response to the other. One precursor, probably even before you, Tom, who noticed the feeling tone similarity between Peter's art and John's novel, was Delia Sherman, who has been collecting Peter's work since the late 1970s. But she and I didn't compare notes 10 years into the Little Big project. Just, various people made that recognition. I at least was not the first. But so eventually we started the project, and it met with many mishaps, I'm afraid, but it took much longer than we expected. We figured it would take a year to 3 years, and it took 17 once we actually hit the ground running, as it were, or crawling. And what happened was that the first printer that we contracted with going out of business. So this is a Vermont printing company, 8 years old, and won multiple awards. And one of the things that was going on is that we were under a fair amount of situational pressure to work quickly. And bankruptcy was was outside money, and it basically cut the knees out from the project. It caused a major financial loss of the money we had taken in to make this real. And as a result, sorry, go ahead. Oh, is somebody okay? As it happens, yes. Eventually, I knew of somebody who possibly could help. You can read about the adventure I had on the littlebig25.com website. It's one of the many updates to the project over the years. It's the one entitled Midnight in Montreal. So in 2009, after the original printer had declared bankruptcy, and we weren't so much as a dime of the ones we had made a down payment on the print job, and result of the shortfall, the silver lining, because it was a disaster. It was an disaster. It was an absolutely harrowing experience to have a large chunk of money disappear like this. And so the silver lining was after I had Neil Gaiman, he had when he later saw our PDF proofs of the layouts, he understood what I was doing and what we were doing, which was to minutely sync these details and a few full-size reproductions to the text, and to do it in a way where it was even suggestive and playful, never intended to be literal, but anyway, it was a cool thing, and Neil got it right away, immediately, and he was in 2009 that he would take care of us, of making sure that the finance stuff was taken care of, and we were able to raise money from several other sources as well. So it was just a long, slow process, but it allowed us to take more time with the art and the syncing of the art with the text. And that was an amazing blessing. It was an accidental blessing. It was an inadvertent, but it was a major blessing. And we spent close to 5 years on going through. I read the novel twice, just in the of choosing art, and Peter Milton gave us carte blanche to draw on 50 years of his work, and so on. And it took us 5 years and 3 complete drafts before we called it done. We finalized the design of the novel per se, the outer, not the front matter and back matter, but the novel per se, February 1st, 2014. And we never changed. We did at the more recently, when we finally finalized of the book, we had to update the front matter, and we had to update the back matter as well, which included a long essay by Harold Bloom novel and so on. And so 12 years after Neil Mays, he kept it, and is a wonderful man, and a very honorable and noble person, as I'm sure most of you know, through
he is indeed
his work.
I would I'd like to get a word or two from John in here about
yes, of course. I
in.
actually was about to say that myself.
Oh, good.
John,
See?
yeah. So, John, do you want to give the first description of our collaboration and how it evolved, and start with?
Sure. Yeah, this is as Ron and I decided yesterday. Yeah, he should start because it comes from him. It was his vision. It is his vision, which we've realized. The page, the typography, the page layout, the book design in the usual sense is mine. Ron was the art director, and we worked very, very closely back and forth, a very iterative process on exactly how we wanted the pages to look and exactly where the art belongs and how it was trimmed. An excruciating but worthwhile process. And well, there you go.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, I mean,
I would starting.
Okay. Go ahead, Tom.
How did you end up really wanting to be connected with this project? You know, was the antiquities thing so much fun that you couldn't resist, or was
must have been? I don't remember. I mean, we really did a wonderful book here with antiquities, and I didn't have any idea what a gigantic project this was going to be.
Yeah.
So I really don't remember how we started.
Is antiquities still available?
No.
Okay. So if you want to get a copy, you have to go hit the used bookstores and go online.
Well,
I have a couple.
Yeah, or the stories in slightly different order or interlead other stories that are not in antiquities in the novelties and souvenirs, which I think might be out of print, but it is from ones came out in the early aughts. But for 8 years, it's the only edition with those stories in it, and was fetching right price for for some time.
Something I want to mention about antiquities was because I knew it was a fairly small book, the opposite is a little big, and I knew that the printer and binder would bind it well, so that you know it's openable flat. I could use an utterly page layout principle, the sort of medieval page layout, text block on the page arrangement, with no modification. I mean, usually if I do this, I have to make the gutter wider for modern printing. But in this case, it was actually, and it seemed appropriate to the nature of John's work, to use this very traditional page layout. I must admit that somebody on a book design jury thought it was misplaced. The fact that if they didn't like it, that's one thing. But if they didn't recognize what I was doing, I thought that's not very knowledgeable.
shouldn't be on a jury of that sort.
Yep. Anyway.
Yes. And then, do you happen to have a copy of Atlantis 3?
By astounding coincidence, I do.
Ah, good. This is the second book I did under the Nebula rubric, and very beautiful. And I mean, do you want to show one of the weird? Maybe we should just move on. But that's the book. That's the Enki edition. We did the first edition, but we also packaged the book in University Press, and that was in 1995. And then, so the gap between Atlantis and Little Big actually coming out was 25, a 25-year gap. And
these were also excruciating things that Delaney wanted, these inset bits of text, which I would normally never do, but we made it work somehow.
Yeah.
I fundamentally feel that the line in a book or anything you're reading, any text you're reading, the line length has to stay the same. It's if you let, for instance, let art butt into it, as magazines often do, that means you don't care about the words. In this case, he cared about the words, but he had an insane way of wanting to present them.
Delaney is always a little insane, and wonderfully so.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he changes sanity by being different.
he breaks the rules very carefully, so that and there was a rhyme and a reason behind everything in Atlantis. But anyway, if I might, I want to flesh out sort of the collaboration process a little bit. The things is, I think that the first and only sample that John showed me was the one we went with. He really liked it, and anything John really likes, I take very seriously. And I fell in love with it instantaneously. And I think we discussed similar to Antiquities. It's not identical, but it's similar in terms of the why and so on, which makes it a nice companion, of a sibling worthy or publication. And then definitely did nuance back and forth regarding of art on the pages. We had the wide outer margins, and that's where we put the side titles, and just did them fairly diminutively, but clearly in 50% black ink. And then we had to experiment with kinds of art in place. And John sometimes can stick in the mud, but for very good reasons. And he ended up doing was, let's just experiment. We're not going to decide. And some of these things sound like outlandish. Some of the idea to place the art in the context of this beautiful typography and this beautiful basic design with the side title. And so we played with it. I'm so grateful to John for being flexible with that, because we found arrangements that were really astonishing. And one of them, we saw that they worked. We also came up with a few that didn't work, and we're really glad that we didn't go with them, because so there's one of the things that we tried for, because I probably initial trims choices probably about 90% of the art in the book, and then of course John's skill set from a production stage just blows mine out of the water. But so he made everything look, but I was minutely critiquing. So it was really a very supple and fine-grained back and forth between us, and that was one of the things that was magnificent. I mean, the phrase in the colophon credit for the design. under his it says the above named men working alone. Oh gosh, I can't. I had it memorized, but I'm not. It's not gonna. It's short. Here, let me read it out of the copy of Little Big. It's right here. It's right here.
Yeah.
Neither of the above named men working alone would have been remotely capable of designing the book you now hold. And that really is true. Now, I mean, let me just be clear. John could have done an edition of Little Big all by himself without any input from me. I mean, he could have, with another publisher, whatever. And it would have been gorgeous. Yeah, well, or whatever. I mean, yeah, I mean, I helped bring the occasion into existence, and we are the benefactors of that occasion on multiple levels, I feel. And the lovers of Little Big are going to be day by day receiving their books finally and at long last. Yeah. I kind of lost my thread there.
What I wanted to do was create pages that I would be comfortable reading. So that was a starting point. And it is. I mean, I've actually reread the novel in this edition, and although it's thick and heavy, it is very easy to read and exactly what I wanted there. And I was reacting. I did not want something like the earlier editions, which are sort of Art Nouveau-y. No, they're sort of Victorian looking, which I thought was entirely wrong.
Art Nouveau is better.
Yeah, and what I was aiming for was something more like a classic literary book of the 30s, say, solid design, and then of course the art had to fit.
Yeah,
but we had to make it something where we did justice to Peter Milton's art as well, including having really good printer. Our original printer, Steinauer, that went out of business, would have been great, but that wasn't to be. But Brilliant Graphics in Exton, Pennsylvania, is the printer that made this happen.
Mm-hmm. Oddly, the book that I keep comparing this to.
One at a time.
Oddly, the book that I keep comparing this to is the Kelmscott Chaucer, because I always found that when I tried to read Chaucer, I'd skim, but the typography that William Morris used in the Kelmscott slows me down enough so that I actually spend the time with the words and get the comprehension that I was losing. Mm-hmm. Similarly, with this book, it's the pacing of reading it in this edition has kept me reading a book which I knew was great, but which never grabbed me. I was never able to keep reading in the previous editions, and this one opens it up. It's not a book that I can sit and hold in my lap and read. I have to lie it flat on a table.
Oh, I have it in my lap. No problem.
Yeah. Ron referred to it as the Oxford Lectern edition.
Yes. I've been known to say that, yes.
Yes. But it's really a wonderful experience to read this. Mm-hmm. And there are very few books out there that I can say that about. And I've read a lot of books.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are, that's what I do. I make a readable page, and most of what goes into that is totally invisible to most people. But if I do it right, then they shouldn't notice it. Mm-hmm. This is noticeable because it's a monumental edition, but it's still, the page is just a page you can read.
Right. And it's important, I think, that people, their copies or receiving their copies and reading their copies, understand that the spine is really flexible, and you don't have to wear kid gloves. I mean, you can, obviously. It's a edition I'm trying good shape, but I find that manhandling it, as it were, is okay. The spine is very strong. It's fine, unlike most novels. We were really resisting the idea, but the printer was rather insistent. He felt it would be, for the nature of the paper, the archival qualities, that it would really be the go. And John and I we're reluctant, but we are rather enthusiastically on board, it was a good choice because you can lay it flat. And one of the things, and I've read the novel now once in the new edition, in my 8th reading overall. And during production, I was examining Book Pro. And so usually I would want to see the entire image area on the page spreads. And necessity almost all the time for a dozen years, looking at it smaller than actual size. So getting the book, it is astounding to read it as a real physical thing in the real world. And the typography is exactly the right size. It's just a joy. And the other thing that for me, and I was really happy, John, should I pass it to you? I mean, what was your reaction to all of the art? Okay, well, I mean, John seemed to, Rad can say it himself, but forgotten. I minutely, over several years period, see details and the choice of details from much larger works. There are full landscape orientation. There's 7 landscape orientation reproductions read on both pages, and almost nothing's lost in the gutter. It's absolutely astonishing. And some images we extracted half a dozen different details, so you couldn't even necessarily tell they were from the same work. And then you would see context. And I had forgotten the underlying reason why I joined one in-page spread to one bit of text. And it was again and again that it actually worked incredibly well. And I don't know. I've never been more blown away by the beauty of John Crowley's prose, and having this amplified with the art made it even more pleasurable here. And the one thing is, I guess I've said before, but it bears repeating. I think the best way to look at it is that there are 3 streams of story in the book. There's the novel. There are the sequence and choice from beginning to end, and that could be just looked at page through, just enjoy the art. And then the third stream is the art and then juxtaposition, and the way it juxtaposes sort of glance. One friend described it as just eyes constantly glancing back and forth from up and seeing what's there and everything. Is anyway, I found it and very, very pleased, and I'm getting a lot of reports that it's really working very well, and that's beyond my best hopes.
Mm-hmm. I often describe it as a dance between the art and the text, which you masterminded. Yeah. Is it possible to, Tom? Is it possible to share screen? I could just show some images. Shall I try it? Let me just try it.
Yeah, see if you can.
Choose what to. Fine. It's not working very well. Nah.
It doesn't seem to be. Okay.
Yeah, it's supposed to happen. I was just going to show as just be able to show some layouts without holding it up and having the problem of
shaky hands,
shaking hands and
yes,
light and stuff. But I can just
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Oh, that's great. Or go ahead, John.
I'm just finding some pages that show. Oops. Keep going.
Oh, like so.
Yeah.
This is a very interesting spread. The following spread. This is an example of one of the things that we were doing. The very next spread. Okay, that's a different.
I don't know where it was. I opened it random.
That's Fine, yeah. I have a few ones that I can locate that were, so there's one of the things that's interesting is because these are engravings, Peter has to engrave in mirror reverse to how it's going to print.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked his permission to mirror reverse and in a few cases do other transformations to the art, just in terms of orientation. Thrilled by the idea, and we played with that a great deal. And let's see, and
which is very interesting in terms of the way most artists are very protective of their work. It's interesting that he was willing to work with you on that.
And I have to admit, of the bulls, I mean, Harold Bloom, alas, is no longer with us and didn't live to see this, but his text is here. John has been very appreciative, but Peter is like over the moon about this edition. And he keeps saying embarrassingly nice things to me when we talk on the phone. And his over Christmas, his children came and hung out for about a week and stuff. And Jeremy and Naomi Milton are his Peter and Edith Milton's son and daughter. They were, over the course of 30 or 40 years, intermittently for Peter Milton's art. And so images of both children are found throughout the edition. And in fact, the running girl on the spine, Tom Whitmore to show us on the spine, or John Barry, there she is. Yes, and that was Naomi as a little girl. I mean, the kids are in their 50s now. Jeremy Milton is actually high up in the Disney organization. He was the editor of Encanto, the film that won all the awards for years. And anyway, they were completely floored. They were totally blown away. Their dad's copy of Little Big immediately, and they spent over the course of the week, the Christmas week, that their family and the kids spent hours poring over the book, and they were blown away. They were like, "Wow, this is great!" And they immediately requested copies of their own. Of course, John and Peter and Bloom's estate, has gift copies coming to them, of course, copies, as you will, artist copies and so on. But that was great fun. The two of the page spreads in that are one of the things that I really love here. And
this is one of the. This is one of the full reproductions that come at the beginning of each of the books within the novel.
Yeah. So before, between, after the 6 books of Little Big are a total of 7 productions. This is a different sort of reproduction of a chapter in The Art of Memory.
Oh yeah.
I have to here because I'm a little weak. I'm recovering from, and so
what's the page number? I can hold mine up.
Yeah, 530 and 531, but also 486 and 87, 487, because it occurs twice. And if you look at it, I'm going to try to hold it up a little bit. Or actually, why don't you do it, John? Because I'm not strong enough to get it.
Yeah,
I want it to drop. Thanks. And then, so you can see that what this is. What I realized is this a city park, and so, and I call it the Infinite Park. Oh, is that for? Yeah, that's for. Yeah, hold yours up again, John. because they're you can see the two spreads. It's the same. Each is the mirror. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Well, we're holding the same one up, I think.
Oh, you're at
But if Tom finds the
487.
other one,
Yeah. And then the first one you showed was 530. They swapped places, so it's two different views, and it just so both of them are in the middle of scenes that take place in City Park, where Ariel Hawksquill and Oberon Drinkwater meet, and in one case, and then later on, when Oberon remeets him in years, the ghost or the phantom Lila, that's not the right word for her. The imaginary friend would be better. So both these scenes, about 60 or about pages apart, right in the middle of a scene. Yeah, that's another. I ripped teeth, and so sorry, I'm being just. Anyway, there's lots of there's lots of wonderful comments, but I haven't really had a chance to read any of them at the moment. But I'm glad they're there, and I'm people are dialing in. But yeah, so those are two versions of an infinite park made out of mirror, basically, and then swapping their places for creating an optical illusion that's very, very interesting and very different from one another. And they both take place in scenes where Oberon is in the city that Ariel Hawks given the key to, and both appear. So the page spread before and after one and begin with compliances, and it just so happens that the 2-page falls right into. It fits in with the conversation. Crazy. It's just there are so many felicitous moments of text flow. It's not unlike we had several in Atlantis Tales with our typographical things that were happening with that. Completely different, but in Little Big, it's just amazing how well things fell into place in terms of juxtaposing art and text. I hope that I'm not speaking quite as clearly as I used to before I had my stroke, but I'm doing okay, I hope.
You're doing fine, Ron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should say that one of the things that made this a hard process going back and forth was Ron doesn't have the software, design software, so he was giving the instructions on exactly how he would want a particular piece of art trimmed. And then I would have to try to match that. And there was also, we had different sources sometimes for the same image. So it was an awful lot of very, very finicky stuff.
Yeah. I forgot what the software was called, but I had a more primitive software that allowed me to execute trims, fairly precise ones. But John was working with software that was appropriate to putting it into a book in production, and it was more nuanced. But the grid, I'm speaking informally, but the grid lines didn't match. So getting exact matches, sometimes it didn't matter. There was a little wiggle room. It didn't really matter where the framing lines fell, where we cut it off. But Peter Milton upon me from the very beginning that framing a work is part of the artistic act, and you needed to be very. When I showed him the first draft of 3, it took us, between drafts of hard. When I showed him the first draft, he was blown away with the artistry of my framing. And not always, but more often than not, the affecting had to do with its impact. So we really wanted to try to duplicate it as closely as possible. And that proved very frustrating. And it took us a while on both sides, both John and I, to diagnose some of the discontinuities between the two programs that was making it difficult. And because to a certain extent, it was a learning process. Like, in other words, we found easier ways to, and so on. But you'll see multiple where, the framing is real. You can tell that if it was odd very much, it would ruin it. And in other cases, it would, you could adjust it a little, so if you're familiar with the full original extracting details from. And that was for most people, they're not going to see it, but it's worth knowing that work has gone into this, that it's been very carefully put together. And this leads to a question: why does one want to do this? Why does one want to put in all this much work to get something? Well, part of it was just, I don't know, once I discovered Peter's work, and then I read the novel, two of my four editorial readings of the novel two were for art placement, so that simultaneous novel and writing notes in a fifth of the book, the HarperCollins edition. So I have a copy that's red ink, and trying to make my way back to your question. And simultaneously sorting through, I had two collections of Peter Milton's artwork, covering about a 40-year. Didn't include the latest stuff, but then in the middle lots, Peter Harry nice website put up, and it's one of the classiest websites I've ever seen in terms of artistry and spaciousness. petermilton.com if anyone is interested. Anyway, sorry, I'm losing my place. Remind me, Tom, what?
Why put all this effort in?
Right.
Why?
To make a beautiful object, to make a beautiful book, to make a beautiful, readable book. And you can of course get the text online these days, but the object in an age that's where so much is digital, so much is done with your keyboard and so on. Having an actual physical object is a hands-on, literally hands-on. That's the other thing
that everyone, again, and I because of one question that I am glancing at here, it bears repeat earlier in this cast, but it bears repeating that the art and the novel were created separately without any reference to one another. I and John and I, who brought them together and made this John's phrase, which is a lovely phrase, making the art dance with the text, and it's really wonderful. And so multiple things. One, Little Big is pretty much my all-time favorite novel. I think that Engine Summer was my favorite novel for 25 years, but on the most recent reading of Little Big, it's slightly aside. So this is a novel for both of them are, and this is a novel for the ages. So one of the things that drove me was wanting an excellent archival edition that if the by chance doesn't destroy itself before the end of the current century, and we live longer and can give ourselves a longer lifetime, this is a work that deserves to survive. And if kept in reasonably controlled environmental conditions, copies of this book should 100 to 1,000 a year. And I want to see this. People, once I hear over and over again from little big is they buy used copies to give away to their friends and to give to their kids and their grandchildren. And this is delightful. And one of the things greatly is Neil Gaiman, who wrote the cover flap essay for the trade edition. The final paragraph essay really nails it really well. So any of you out there who have these, go ahead and reread the final paragraph. He recognizes his reaction is similar to mine, which is that we can't imagine what people see in the juxtaposition of Peter Milton's art and John Crowley's future decades and centuries. Only the people who come after us, the children, the grandchildren, the friends, and just the people we give copies of the book to, and with this as an agent, passed down through the century, this physical object, which is durable in a way that the edition of Little Big has been durable, is a gift to the future, is a gesture. As count might seem, it's a gesture to our own collective longevity. We need to save ourselves so that we can save magnificent works of art like this novel and like its brand new intertwinement with the pre-existing art of Peter Milton, who, thank God, lived to see this. Peter's 92 now, and he's just blown away. As he said over and over, he's really blown away by the work that we did and the way the art dances with the text.
I would just like to read one of the comments that I love here. It just says Facebook user, so I'm not sure who did it, but a book you could curl up into an old leather armchair with, next to a window getting splashed by the rain. Exactly.
And we have come very close to the end of our time. And boy, that really summed it up nicely. I want to thank you both for being here, for sharing all of this, for producing such an amazing volume. I own a lot of books. This is one of the most beautiful. It really is.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm really glad to have it. I'm looking forward to the signed edition. And I didn't get the special lettered edition because I didn't have that much money to spare. But I'm very excited that this has finally come out and that you have done such an amazing job and such a wonderful thing, and that you've done it. You did something good.
Yeah, we figured that out.
Yeah. And I like to support the fact of people doing things they love and doing them well. So thank you for coming on and talking about it. I'm going to hand this back to Bob so that he can do a little bit of blurbing for B Cubed Press, which does not produce books of this magnitude, but produces some damn fine stories and some damn fine anthologies, and is supportive of those people who are doing what they do well in the way that you do what you do well. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you, Tom, for having us.
Well, let me just say, I work with people who have a passion for their work. I have a passion for my work. But I don't think I've ever seen this much passion over a book being developed. And it's an honor to see it, to recognize that degree of building a book as a legacy. It's just very impressive, and I applaud you both. It is great. And I know now both of you are publishers other than this project, correct?
I'm not a publisher usually. Well, I have done some, but mostly I'm an editor, book designer,
Then
typographer.
let us drink our coffee to the gods. That, next week, you don't open it up to page 493 and find a typo.
I did not find a single typo in reading it. I found one hyphenation that I would have done differently. What?
I did not find a single typo either.
Right.
I haven't seen one yet either. So, yeah.
There probably is one or two, but we didn't find them. We had multiple persons. Yeah.
It's a testament to the work you've done. And if you do find one, plant a great big gold star next to it so that you can say, yeah, just one. But anyway, this is so impressive. The art was so beautiful. If I lived in if I had another bedroom in my house, I'd probably buy one to put in there. But no. But this is BQ Press, and we do publish books too, just nothing on that magnitude. But we're working on our 25th book right now. And for 6 years isn't terribly bad. And it is called Scott's Planet. And I'm sending out the encouraging thoughts for submissions, because Scott's Planet is a new project for us. It's a trilogy of an anthology trilogy set in a shared world. So try and figure out a better way to blow it than that. I don't know, but what we're doing is we all watched TV and saw those bad space operas about lost colonies of Earth, you know? And so I was sitting there drinking something better than coffee, and I asked myself, well, how'd they ever get there anyway? So we built the premise that colonization processes, ships, asteroid, faster than light, all of it coalesced into the perfect world where the Union Corporation thought that they could make a lot of money. And so they seeded about 130 planets out there with a 10-year support contract. At the end of the 10-year support contract, if you weren't making money for them, they told you, thank you very much, you're on your own. Or we'll pick up anybody who wants to go home on our last supply ship. And that is the birth of Scott's Planet. It's a planet that's kind of like early Carboniferous period on Earth. It's a nice place to be. It's kind of it's not set up so that they're in there fighting for their lives every day against dinosaurs. No, it's a book about community and how community pulls together, survives, grows. It's on the borderline hope punk, but we're doing. Hey, we did hope punk last week, and I did not realize how much hope punk I had published, because I'm an old scientist who's retired, and in my world, the greatest sense is redemption. You know. Stories. I love stories about redemption, and I love stories with humor. So anyway, that's coming up. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that Little Big is a story about many layers and levels of redemption, if that would further. And I chime in with you on
that. Our webpage, Scott's Planet, we handle our submissions through Moksha. But if you guys want, I'll be glad to send both of you a link to the call. But
I would love it.
Okay, then I shall do it. Now I'll warn you, on this planet, the millipedes are go in and read about the Carnivorous period. It was before dinosaurs made us, tried to make us extinct, so we're fully survivable. But the millipedes are 11 feet long and taste like lobster. It'll be fun. But anyway, that was this week's B Cube Press. We'll be back next week with Cliff winning. And then after that, it'll be David Gerald and Jim Wright, followed up by our new favorite, the first Sunday brunch, where I had 4 women manage the show one week completely. And I sat there and watched them get along so well, communicate so well, interact so well. I just turned First Sunday over to them forever. And so we're looking forward to seeing what they bring us. But anyway, thank you all. Any last questions or plugs you want to make?
littlebig25.com, right?
Yes.
Yep.
littlebig25.com in order to check out the book. There are still copies available, but who knows how long they'll last. Other than centuries.
Do that.
They'll be available for centuries.
And you guys all enjoy, because that just is a beautiful book, and I can just feel the love dripping off every damn page. So you take care. And I'm going to push a button that says we're going to quit.
Will we still see the comments?